Today on Bench Briefs, we're looking at a pivotal Supreme Court of Canada decision from 1996 known as RVRISD, a case that dives deep into the complex and sensitive issues of consent in sexual assault law, especially where minors are involved. At its core, this case revolves around an accused person, DR, who faced charges of sexual assault involving a minor. The central question was whether the complainant, a young person, had consented to the sexual activity and if the accused had a reasonable belief that this consent existed. It might sound straightforward, but as we'll see, the legal standards for consent and reasonable belief are anything but simple. So, what actually happened? The details are delicate, but here's the gist. DR was accused of engaging in sexual activity with someone under the age of consent. The trial focused heavily on the evidence surrounding whether the complainant agreed to the sexual contact. The accused argued that he believed the complainant was consenting. The trial judge had to weigh the credibility of both parties and decide if that belief was reasonable under the law. This brings us to the key legal issues the Supreme Court had to consider. First, how should courts interpret and apply the concept of consent in sexual assault cases involving minors? Consent isn't just a simple yes or no. The law recognizes that factors like age, understanding, and the circumstances of the interaction all matter. The court needed to clarify what counts as valid consent when a minor is involved. Second, the court examined whether the accused had a reasonable belief in the complainant's consent. This is a critical standard in Canadian criminal law. It's not enough for the accused to honestly believe consent was given. That belief must also be reasonable in the eyes of the law. The court had to explore what that reasonableness standard means in practice, especially given the vulnerability of minors. Third, the court looked at the evidentiary standards and legal tests applicable to assessing consent and reasonable belief. In other words, how should judges and juries evaluate the evidence to determine if consent was present and if the accused's belief was reasonable? This involves understanding the burden of proof, the role of credibility, and how to interpret the interactions between the parties. Why does this case matter? RVRAE helped clarify the legal framework around consent and reasonable belief in sexual assault cases involving minors. It underscored that consent must be clear, voluntary, and informed, and that the accused's belief in consent must be grounded in reasonable grounds, not just a personal assumption. This case reinforced the protections for young people under the law, recognizing their particular vulnerability and the importance of safeguarding their autonomy. Moreover, the decision influenced how courts handle evidence in these sensitive cases, balancing the rights of the accused with the need to protect complainants. It helped shape the way sexual assault laws are applied across Canada, ensuring that the concept of consent is not watered down or misunderstood, especially when young people are involved. In short, RVRAMSD is a landmark case that continues to guide Canadian courts in navigating the difficult terrain of consent, reasonable belief, and the protection of minors in sexual assault cases. Thanks for listening to Bench Briefs. Be sure to join us next time for another episode where we unpack the cases shaping Canadian law today.